Hello everyone, welcome to World Journal YouTube channel. My name is Wang Ruoran, I'm today's host. Hate against the Asian American has been rising since the pandemic. We heard a lot of stories about Asian elders being targeted as hate crime victims. These stories are wake-up calls that all of us need to speak up and stop anti-Asian hate. So today, we invite 6 speakers, including Congresswoman Judy Chu, State Assembly Member Mike Fong, to talk on how to prevent Asian communities from being hate crime victims. First, let's invite Charlie Wu to share some data on anti-Asian hate incidents or crimes on state level. Charlie Wu is a founder and chair of CAUSE, which is a nonprofit organization with a mission to advance the political and civic empowerment of the AAPI community.
Our finding on the hate crime impacting the Asian American community is pretty dramatic. And we have found that 72%, almost 3/4 of Asian Americans in California live in fear of becoming a victim of hate crimes. And 63%, almost about 2/3, are fearful of being victims of verbal harassment and hate incidences. And 60% of parents, Asian parents, are worrying about their children getting bullied in school because of their race and ethnicity. This is a pretty overwhelming number. And 30% of Asian Americans feel that all this worry about all this fear has impacted their mental health. So this is a pretty big, widespread impact. And then we have been telling this story, right? So this is really to the degree that it has damaged our community. But I also want to share with you something that how others react to our situation. Prior to the pandemic, prior to the hate crimes, only more than half, about 55% of Californians, according to our survey, believe that Asian Americans were being discriminated. But right after the hate crime were being reported, 72%, of all Californians now recognize that Asian Americans are victims of discrimination. And then this number is pretty consistent. As you can see that the fear of pandemic has come down, but Asian American, the fear of hate crime has not gone down. And fortunately, the public has realized that we have a problem. Asian Americans have a problem.
Charlie also talked on how CAUSE has been advancing justice of Asian communities and what resources they provide.
As I mentioned, we have collected data, even before the pandemic, before the hate crime were being reported, and continue to collect the data, and then we shared it with the public, right? We did not do this alone. We collaborated with the leading African American groups and the Latino groups in the Southern California. When we talk about injustice suffered from each one of our community, we would speak up together so that we form important allies. And I think it's really important that to create public awareness, not just among our community so that we know how to protect ourselves better, but make sure that the public is becoming more educated and more likely to condemn such terrible acts of hatred against Asian Americans. And also CAUSE's main program is to do leadership development as well as building bridges to elected officials to discuss the issue facing Asian Americans.
Legislation is very important to protect the communities from being hurt by hate crimes. Congresswoman Judy Chu and State Assembly Member Mike Fong talked about what federal laws and state laws are available for stopping hate against Asian Americans.
And it was just 2.5 years ago at the beginning of 2020 that the pandemic was beginning to take hold. And we heard from so many Asian American business owners who were experiencing discrimination and even outright acts of hate and violence. That's why we started working on this. And then we were hearing about terrible acts of anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents, senior citizens being pushed to the ground, to their deaths even, a family of 3 being stabbed, and 2 of them were children ages 2 and 6, with the man shouting that he wanted to kill Asian Americans. And of course, the terrible spa shootings in Georgia, where 8 people were shot and 6 of them were Asian women. That's why we worked to put together legislation to better protect Asian American communities. We worked on a bill that was introduced by Congressmember Grace Meng and Senator Mazie Hirono. It included my legislation, the No Hate Act, which I led with Congressmember Don Beyer. And all in all, what these bills do are things like provide better prosecution of hate crimes, so there's a special person tracking them and pushing them along. It provides for a hate crime coordinator at the U.S. Department of Justice. It provides for better tracking and reporting of hate crimes so that we have a better picture of where they are. And also, it provides for better training of local law enforcement on how to handle hate crimes, as well as resources like state victims hotline so that victims can have better access to resources.
As a legislature, working with the governor, the legislature and the governor passed the API equity budget in 2021 and allocated over $166 million to work on issues such as hate crimes, and $110 million went to the California Department of Social Services to distribute funds directly to community-based organizations dealing with hate crimes and those types of services. Also, $10 million went directly to the Stop API Hate Coalition. That's a group that has been doing tremendous work around this area. And also $10 million to the API Data Project to improve data equity in our communities. And money also going to grants, to media outlets, to hotline services. So we know there's a lot more work to be done to provide these resources. In addition, in the 2022 budget that we just approved in the legislature about a month ago, an additional $40 million was allocated to address these issues.
When talking about hate, it's very important to differentiate hate incidents from hate crimes. Now, let's invite Becky Monroe to talk on this subject. She works for the Civil Rights Department of the State of California. She is the Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives and External Affairs. She also mentioned that both hate crime victims and hate incident victims can receive help and compensation from the state.
We are hearing both an increase in hate crimes as well as hate incidents. Now, a hate crime under state law, and actually this definition generally applies with respect to federal law, is when someone commits a crime and it is motivated by hate or bias against a protected category. So what that means, if someone targets someone, for example, for an assault, and they do it because of their national origin, or because of their ethnicity, or because of the color of their skin, that would make it a hate crime. So a hate crime requires an underlying crime and the motivation that is, again, motivated by bias against that person's, some aspect of that person's identity. A hate incident, we usually think of hate incidents in 2 different ways. One form of a hate incident is in fact a violation of the law. It's just not a violation of the criminal law. So for example, in my agency, we can help to investigate and bring cases for civil rights violations that may not rise to the level of a crime, but are still nonetheless a violation of civil rights law. So one form of a hate incident is an act of hate that is against the law, it's just not against criminal law. The other kind of hate incident may very well be technically lawful, but still very harmful. So those are the kinds of cases we see that people may say are protected by First Amendment speech. And so in that case, you wouldn't necessarily seek legal action, but it is important to know that those acts can still have cause a lot of harm. So I want to talk about 2 different initiatives. So one thing I want to talk about right now, and this is something my agency has long had jurisdiction to do, which is if someone is targeted for an act of hate, we have jurisdiction under something called the Ralph Act. But the content of the law is such that if you are targeted for an act of hate violence, then you may be eligible to recover civil damages, which means some money, and that could be actual damages. So maybe you incurred additional costs because you were targeted for hate. It could also include something called injunctive relief, That is relief that basically deals with stopping someone else from taking an action or making them to take another action. And we can do that here if you come to our agency now. So you can go to dfeh.ca.gov to learn more information about that. And we will make it language accessible. That is our obligation as a state agency, is to make sure we are accessible in Chinese, in any language that people come to us from California in. The other thing that I'm really excited about, and I'm really grateful to you for sort of reaching out about this, is that we want to share that in the fall, we will have a new statewide resource line called California versus Hate. Again, that will be language accessible to everybody across the state of California, so people can call in language. And we will provide resources to people who are targeted for hate.
Terminating hate on Asian Americans needs everyone's input. Political power plays a critical role. Congresswoman Judy Chu and State Assembly member Mike Fong talked about what can Asian political leaders do to help reduce hate crimes and how increasing Asian political power and participation can help reduce hate crimes.
We, in fact, and when I say we, the Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, which I chair, made this our mission. We have to speak up about it. We have to denounce them and make sure that people stand together, not only with just the Asian community, but also with people of all ethnic backgrounds, Jewish, Black, white, Hispanic, and that we all stand together in saying that these hate crimes cannot occur, should not occur, and we have to do everything that we can to prevent them from occurring. In reality, it's important to have representation at all levels of government. There was a time when there was hardly any of us in our local, state, or federal government. But it's important to have us in all those levels, because at each level, you can do something about these hate crimes, not the least of which is maybe passing a resolution on a city council condemning these hate crimes. But the reason I say it's important is because it's important for general society to see that Asian Americans are leaders and that they are part and parcel of this society, that we take an active part in government, in shaping our laws, and in passing laws that will affect everybody in this country, and that we contribute to this country. So this is all about making sure that we have a positive image in this country and that our voices are heard at every level, from the local to the state to the federal.
Asian American elected officials must continue to elevate and to advocate on these issues regarding the safety and livelihood of our community. We know with the APA Legislative Caucus, which I'm proud member of in the California State Assembly, we know that we've got to continue to focus on anti-Asian hate and look at bill priorities that will combat these hate crime issues. For instance, some of the pending legislation that we're working on as API Caucus, some of our priorities include Assembly Bill 1947, which would require all law enforcement agencies to adopt an updated hate crimes policy, and that would instruct officers on how to identify, respond to, and report hate crimes. Secondly, we also have Assembly Bill 2448, which will require businesses to train workers on spotting and reporting acts of discrimination that occur on their premises. We also have Senate Bill 1033, which would strengthen requirements on survey data and demographic data on community needs, such as housing, nutrition, and other supports, which looks at how we can positively impact health incomes. And then lastly, one other bill that we're looking at is Assembly Bill 2596, which is authored by Assemblyman Evan Lowe, which recognizes our Asian Pacific Islander cultures and also celebrates the fabric of American diversity. In terms of Asian American political engagement and political power and participation, we know that there's a lot more work to be done to continue to build the pipeline of Asian American elected officials at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. Here in California, in the San Gabriel Valley, we do have a number of Asian American elected officials, but throughout the state and throughout the nation, we know that Asian Americans are very underrepresented in the public space and in elected office. And so an increase in Asian American elected officials across the country would need more voices in prioritizing the reduction of hate crimes, along with legislation that would provide those resources to service the Asian Pacific Islander community, and also to address hate crime issues, and to really make sure that we have representation at all levels of government. And it's important to build that next generation pipeline for the next generation of leaders in the community, and also to really show that our elected officials and community elect that we're united, that we're relentless in our fight to reduce hate crimes. And this is something that we continue to do to increase our political engagement and participation.
Imagine one encounters hateful or discriminatory behavior towards himself or herself. What should he or she do? Los Angeles County Human Relations Commissioner Michael Chen gave his advice and shared resources from the LA County government.
Because Human Relations Commissioner, it's we have the every month we have this meeting. We have to invite the police department to tell us what happened in Lele, for instance. The criminals attack, to focus on Asian communities, especially Chinese community, because they know Chinese people, they don't like to contact with enforcement department like police. So the one thing we have to tell any people, if you encounter this kind of criminal, you have to report it. And in the meantime, our community have to help each other, and let people know that when you see something happen, you have to yell it, and have to help them. You may not be help in person, but at least from the distance yelling that, because if people carry a gun, you'll come to help, it can be danger yourself. So if with some distance, you can yell it and bring up everybody's attention. So and after that, you have to report it. Definitely have to report it to the police department to make a record.
Lastly, let's welcome Temple City Mayor Pro Tem William Mann to talk on how younger Asian Americans can get involved in the movement of stopping anti-Asian hate.
In Temple City, we have a very active youth community. And so what we've seen is a lot of our younger Asian American residents have taken to social media to tell their stories. And so while their stories might not always be about specifically anti-Asian hate, it could be about discrimination. It could be about microaggressions. It could be about their own experiences with this and how that contributes to this overall atmosphere of anti-Asian hate. Something happened in April of 2021 that initially we thought was an anti-Asian hate incident. And it spread pretty quickly on social media through Instagram and Facebook. And so when we found out about it, we obviously were very concerned, and our sheriff's department investigated it. And it turned out to be an incident of a mentally ill homeless gentleman who was shouting and yelling threatening things to residents who were just walking their dogs or walking down the street. And he was saying certain things that, if you were there, you would say, hey, this person is spewing anti-Asian hate, or maybe he might seem to be targeting Asian people. But at the same time, we have to remember Temple City is now close to 65% Asian American. So we have a majority of our residents are Asian American. And so the likelihood of the victim being Asian American is really high. So it turns out it wasn't truly an anti-Asian hate crime, but it was still it was noteworthy in that it brought sort of the spotlight to our city, and we're usually pretty quiet. Beyond that, we haven't really had anything that would rise to the level of big concern. We highly encourage our residents to report and speak up on anything that looks wrong or it's wrong, especially when it comes to anti-Asian hate. incidents, I know that our sheriff's department is very attuned and aware that has been an issue that was growing in attention nationwide. And we as a community, especially since there's such a large Asian American population, not just in Temple City, right, but in the entire Southern California region, I think for us to come together and support each other in this time is really important.
Addressing hate issues is imperative and needs long-term efforts. It's an issue that exists not only in Asian communities, but in all ethnic groups. As Charlie Wu said, we need to build coalitions to stop hate. We believe working together, we can stop it. Thank you for watching today's seminar. Feel free to leave comments and share this video to your family and friends. See you next time.